So greetings, hello, welcome to the Philosophy Club here in the Museum of the Muses, where we celebrate all the 9 daughters of Zeus and Memory, as they did in the original academy in Athens, set up by Plato, who's one of the great thinkers of all time. I'm listening to his Laws at the moment. It's interesting, in his Laws, it was the last book he wrote in old age about what makes for a civilized republic, a country, how can you organize affairs. And he did get quite religious in his old age. He talks about all the most important offices of this imagined republic that he's talking to people about. How would you create it? What kind of laws would it have? He said that when you select the officials, like the people that will have authority and power, they should go to Delphi and do prayers before the gods, because to have political power is a very important thing, and you should be very pious to do that. And it's interesting he invokes Delphi as the most holy site, because of course I run the International Delphic Academy with colleagues connected with the Delphic Games, and my colleagues have rebirthed the Delphic Games into the modern world. Which to me is about bringing that self-knowledge to bear on human affairs, which was Plato's idea in the Laws. If you have time, read it. So let's start with a little roundup of the week, what I've been up to, and of hopefully more general significance. So earlier this week I spoke at a meeting for the African Peace Studies Network, run by my colleague George Mtalemwa, who's involved with the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum, and we've known each other for a few years now. He also runs the Catholic Universities of Africa. It's a network of academic centres throughout Africa. He's a sociologist teaching in Tanzania, and he has a focus group of, there are about 35 people on the call, professors from not just Africa, but also worldwide, who are interested in peace in Africa, I think, and globally. Obviously, I think anyone that's into peace studies should be concerned about Africa, because it's got several wars going on in the Congo, in the Sudan. If we can get peace in Africa, we can get peace in the world, and if we don't, we fail. So it is important. I gave a talk which was recorded, where I proposed my Solomon option as an alternative to the Samson option. And you can watch that. It's a separate, hour-long talk. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but in a nutshell, the Samson option is the Israeli Defense Forces mandate to kill everyone rather than let anyone be captured as a hostage. And that is something that Israel invokes as a military doctrine. It seems that they did invoke this on the 7th of October because a lot of, some it seems, and we still don't know the figures, there's been no inquiry, but at least some of the 1,200 Israeli dead were probably killed by their own fire, according to the Samson doctrine, which means don't let them be captured as hostages. I suspend judgment, but that would appear to be the case, and some of the people that died in the kibbutzes seem to have been killed by the Israeli Defense Forces as well, under this Samson doctrine, which I think is wrong, obviously. What I'm proposing, and it seems to me that the mutually assured destruction, MAD, which is the logic of deterrence, nuclear deterrence, if you attack me, I can attack you back and we can kill each other to smithereens. That's nuclear deterrence. So that is actually a form of the Samson doctrine, because it's saying, if you attack me, I'm going to destroy all of you. So if Russia decides to attack Ukraine and Britain attacks Russia and then Russia attacks us, everyone dies, everyone falls down dead. America too. I mean, that is not just mad, it is the Samson doctrine's logic. I'm saying, and I said in my talk, we have to move to something I call the Solomon option, instead of the Samson option. And Samson, interestingly enough, a biblical character, he did his heroic suicide in which he killed all the Philistines in a temple of Dagon. It was in Gaza. Gaza was an ancient, important city in the, the ancient cities of the Philistines, on the coast there of Palestine. And the name Palestine comes from the Philistines, who were there long before Israel, long before the Israeli state ever came into being. And it's interestingly thought that they were probably connected to the Mycenaean Greeks, who were settling along the coast, because the pottery they have, the Philistines, was Mycenaean Greek pottery. I've been to Mycenae in Greece, amazing place. It was where Agamemnon was from, and it's really worth visiting. And the Trojan War, which took place in about 1250 BC, was obviously fought from Mycenae as the headquarters of the Greeks. It's fascinating to think they were relatives of the Philistines of Gaza. So there's a lot of history to unpack. And the other thing I want to say is I've been listening to a fascinating book by a British academic based in London, who's a professor at the University of London, my alma mater, called Palestine, a 4,000-year-old history. He's a fantastic historian who's done us all a favour, Noor Masalha is his name, in researching in depth the 4,000-year history of Palestine, which he starts back in the ancient days, the Bronze Age, and even before. Those people were living there for tens of thousands of years, even hundreds of thousands as early hominids in that part of the world. And he takes that history all the way through from ancient times into the time of the Persian Empire, when they had that territory, and then on into obviously there's the time of Israel's expansion as a state, but he's somewhat skeptical of biblical history, and he points out that in the IDF the Bible is read as a chronological history of that region, but actually archaeological scholarship and historical scholarship academically finds no evidence that the Bible is historically accurate. And he critiques the biblical history of the invasion of Joshua, supposedly in around 1100 BC, and its mass conquest of the Canaanite cities of what later was called Palestine. What Masalha says is there's no evidence that actually happened. It was written up much later, after the exile of the Hebrews into Babylon, those texts, as a sort of wishful thinking, looking back, projecting into history. This is what it must have been like. Because we want to go home, we have to glorify our history and make it that we were the great conquering people. What's a bit scary is that text is now read as if it's factually 100% correct, and therefore justifies the settler movement in the West Bank. It justifies even the attempt to steal Gaza, even though there's never been a time in all of history when Israel ruled Gaza. It was always an independent territory. It was a Palestinian territory. And Masalha goes into all this in great detail. I really recommend that book. It's published. It's the single best history of Palestine that I've ever come across. And I've travelled to the area and I've studied that history in some depth. And he's done us all a favour. He also talks about the advent of Zionism and its arrival in the Holy Land in the 19th century. And he talks about the role of the British, actually. This is something that is fascinating. Obviously, the Balfour Declaration, he explains, didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a whole bunch of evangelical Christians in the 19th century, of whom a chap called Anthony Ashley Cooper, who was the Earl of Shaftesbury at the time, I think the 8th Earl, they were reading their Bibles very literally, I think making the same mistake as the IDF. And they were reading the book of Revelations, and they were thinking that in order to bring about the second coming of Jesus and the happy ending of history, first the Jews had to all go back to Palestine and rebuild Israel. And therefore the British took it upon themselves to adopt that as a project, which was, they said, this was embedded into British colonialism and imperialism. If we could pull that off and get the Jews back in Palestine, we could usher in the second coming and everyone would be happy. And this chap, Lord Shaftesbury, was at the core of that movement. Now, the trouble is that Lord Shaftesbury was theologically ignorant, as any research will show. He had studied at Harrow School, but he never read theology. He wasn't aware of the developments in 19th century critical biblical studies, which show that these eschatological kind of oversimplistic readings of history are actually unfactual, and they cause a lot of damage. And so what Maselha is correct in doing is saying, we need to unthink this Christian bit of Zionism. It's based on biblical literalism, which doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The trouble is that in America, in a lot of the Bible Belt, they still believe in biblical literalism. And a lot of the people supporting Trump and extreme Zionism and extreme Christian Zionism are coming from a pre-Enlightenment theology, whereby Christ is literally coming from the clouds to blast the world with fire and damnation if you're not, part of the club. And somehow they've got it into their minds that having a superpower, Israel, armed with American weapons, is going to help that narrative along. Well, this you need to read Maselha's book if you want. It's like a remedy, a therapy for that kind of oversimplistic reading of history, in my opinion, which has caused huge damage and is really their sort of mental justification for what they've been doing in Gaza. Anyway, I explained all this in my talk on the 6th of August, which was in honour of commemoration of Hiroshima Day and the tragedy of all that. And I proposed instead the Solomon option. Solomon was the wisest king. The books of Solomon are the best bits of the old part of the Bible, in my opinion. He was the builder of the temple. He was open to pagan wisdom. He was friendly with Phoenicia. They sent people to build the temple, architects. And in 18th century Freemasonry, and prior to that, Chevalier Ramsay, the great French Freemason, talks about Solomon was an image of universal wisdom. So in the Masonic lodges, Solomon is the Masonic lodges are rebuilding Solomon's temple as an image of wisdom. And Francis Bacon, one of the sort of electric boosters of Freemasonry, which has an ancient history, but certainly Francis Bacon was part of that in the time of King James. They understood Solomon as a metaphor for wisdom, and he wrote a book about. He saw scientists as working in a temple of wisdom. That was the point of science. And I agree with him. So what I'm saying, the Solomon option, is we rebuild this peace, shattered peace in the Middle East, by invoking the wisdom of Solomon, not the anger and hatred of Samson. So we replace the Samson option with the Solomon option. And Solomon is respected by Jews, Muslims, Christians, Freemasons, secularists, anyone that's ever studied either the Bible properly or any other religion and or science will respect Solomon. So I think, anyway, you can listen to that talk that was given on the 6th of August, which seemed appropriate. And also on that day, I attended a conference run from Oslo for Hiroshima Day, but run by the Nobel Peace Institute, which is based in Oslo. It's where they choose the Nobel Prize winners each year for peace. And it was a very high-level conference, very well spoken. We had a fascinating Iranian Nobel Prize winner speaking at a distance from Iran. She's a feminist, outspoken critic of the theological straitjacket that's been imposed on Iranian society. She's herself been imprisoned and not had an easy time of it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
She was speaking very, very powerfully about peace equals human rights equals rights for women, rights for the environment, freedom of speech, all the kind of things that the 18th century Enlightenment gave the world. She wants it for Iran. So she spoke very well. We had other Nobel Prize winners speaking. It was a fascinating discussion. And then we had the Norwegian foreign minister speaking, who was I was impressed by his wisdom, actually. Chap called how do you pronounce his name?
Bart Eide.
Okay, I can't quite get my tongue around this.
Espen Barth Eide.
Okay, he was very good, and he said one immortal phrase he came out with discussing history. He's kind of an intellectual. He said, Espen Barth Eide, yeah, that's it, said, history doesn't repeat itself, which is what Marx said. No, but it does rhyme. So you see patterns recurring in different eras. And so we're seeing patterns occurring in modernity, which we wish we weren't seeing.
Deja vu.
We have a sort of deja vu things going on. We had a talk by a French intellectual who runs PRIO, the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, which I visited. I was, I'd love to see a London equivalent of PRIO, Peace Research Institute of Britain. This chap's called Arnaud Siad, a French intellectual. He chaired a panel with also the former Swedish Prime Minister who spoke, and who was called Stefan Löfven, who is now the chair of SIPRI, the Swedish Institute of Peace Research in Stockholm, which I've also visited.
Stefan Löfven.
Okay, Stefan Löfven, who again was highly intelligent, and he said we don't want, whilst he's admits that one needs to help Ukraine arm against the aggression of Russia, he was very clear that that shouldn't be escalated up to nuclear weapon rearmament. He wants nuclear disarmament globally, and that's SIPRI's position. So yes, conventional arms, let's, but as soon as possible get a truce, get a peace, get a ceasefire. He's also supporting the UN with his Pact for the Future, which I've been doing. And let's support positive change, which is necessary. And he mentioned a very important conference in Seville recently, which is about development funding. So we need to be putting funding into development rather than weapons, or as well as, if you want. We also had a very moving and tragic speech from a Ukrainian woman, Sasha Romantsova, who has also won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she has set up an organisation that monitors nuclear safety in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. And she really turned my hair grey and made it all stand up, because she was talking about what's happening in Zaporizhzhia, which is the biggest nuclear power plant in the whole of Europe.
That's scary.
And which is now under the control of Russia. They've captured it. And she explained how the staff that have been working there are highly trained Ukrainian nuclear technologists running the thing. Russia's basically been arresting them and torturing them to make them do what they want. And they've been monitoring all this and finding what's been going on. And it's a very, very dangerous situation. If that plant were to do a Chernobyl, it would make Chernobyl look like a firecracker, because it's much bigger. She showed the extent of the megawatts that this power station provides, and if there weren't enough reasons, this is why we desperately need to stop this war on the Ukraine-Russian front. To be fighting around nuclear power stations is unthinkable morally and in every possible way. So that's my proposal, which I put forward, the Solomon option, is to link the two wars that are going on, the Gaza, Israel, Palestine war, with the Ukraine-Russia war. And I think I'm the first person to say, let's solve these together in one simple move, which is that we should freeze the Ukrainian-Russian war along its existing lines. I mean, it's a catastrophe, it's happened. Just have an immediate ceasefire, truce, a freeze, and stop bombing each other. So no more missiles or drones go across that front line. It's frozen. And it will be monitored by UN peacekeeping troops building little lookouts and stuff. And both sides would have to sign up to this, agree, Putin and Zelensky. Now, of course, they can go back to fighting in a year or two if they want. I mean, they are still going to be fighting around this for the next 100 years, probably. But for now, just freeze it. And instead of going on fighting, both Russia and Ukraine should contribute to a flotilla of support and assistance and aid to Gaza, where there's huge famine and tragedy and killing. And I'm proposing the UN Security Council should organise a flotilla of assistance to Gaza, not just little airdrops. And it's not enough because Israel keeps shutting and opening the routes from the landlines. No, an actual armada should go in, manned by both Russian, Ukrainian, French, British, Polish, Canadian, Turkish, Egyptian, whoever wants to contribute. Indonesians would probably do, Malaysians, because their hospitals have been destroyed. The Indonesian hospital in Gaza has been utterly destroyed. And that it should have the support of, all the religious leaders, Christian, Muslim and Jewish and everyone else. And that aid would go in. Now, it would have to have an armed protection force with it. So a few battleships would be needed, because it's possible the extreme right-wing Israeli Zionists would try and bomb that. But I think if you bomb a NATO fleet, a lot of the countries I mentioned are members of NATO, then that invokes NATO as a defence shield. And I don't think even Israel would go that far, because it would be, a stupid thing to do. All that flotilla would be doing is trying to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza. But they would have to have control of the airspace above Gaza and the perimeter, and get a ceasefire, truce. The hostages need liberating. Now, there are huge moral necessities why this is an urgent thing. Instead of the Samson doctrine, we need the Solomon option. And so that's what I was proposing. I also noted that on the 9th, that's yesterday, there was a talk in the UN Security Council, which was filmed, with the Palestinian ambassador to the UN speaking, and also the Israeli foreign minister. And there's some terrible footage that's come out of apparently the tunnels in in Gaza, where some of the hostages are still being kept. And one of them was forced on camera to dig his own grave. Now, I'm assuming this is genuine footage. Why Hamas would release this, the Israeli foreign minister was saying this proves Hamas are barbarians. They're making a chap dig his own grave. It's a shocking thing. I mean, it's morally stupid and incomprehensible. Really, are Hamas that stupid? Perhaps, I suspend judgment, but it's really annoying the Israelis who then say, well, that's why we're going after them. We have to conquer them all. We have to capture Gaza City and get every single tunnel cleared. And I think that it's a tragedy. And the Samson doctrine would be, yes, let's destroy everyone and they'll kill all the hostages and everyone will die. But at least we'll have won, say the extreme Zionists. The Solomon option is, no, ceasefire, truce, get the hostages released by diplomacy. Hamas would have to surrender and come out of their tunnels and just give up any hope of governing the future state of Gaza, because they've lost their mandate for that. And a technocratic government of Gaza would come into being. So that's it's ongoing, this dialogue. I've also this week been speaking to my good colleague Satyen Raja in Canada, who runs my Peace Institute in Canada, and is very busy with his own coaching and international, upskilling work for CEOs. We had a good chat this week. I'm also making a book of my daughter Sophia's poems. I'm determined to publish this. When she was sitting here in the Philosophy Club a year ago, she was here for 3 months and gave me her poetry, which was all on her phone, and she managed to email me her poems, which I'm now editing and putting into a book, which should be finished in a month or so. And it's it's very moving to do that. I've also been. Sophie was part of a group that set up a regular full moon gathering, initially in Brighton in person, attached to the festival, Brighton Festival, but now it's online. I attended yesterday for the full moon gathering, and it was run live from the Boomtown Festival near Winchester, which is a big festival. I mean, this time of year is a magical time. If Sophie was alive, she used to love going to festivals, where young people can go and have fun and dance and do workshops and learn about nature and all that. It just breaks my heart that she can't physically be there anymore. I've also been working on a book called The Logic of Peace, which I'm determined to publish later this coming week. I submitted it to a journal that deals with the history and philosophy of logic. It's a detailed look at logic as a discipline of philosophy. And I'm arguing we need a new branch of logic called the logic of peace. And I've been going over the history of logic in classical sources, in Islamic logic, Christian logic, the whole history of logic, and searching out what would a logic of peace look like, and in Buddhist logic and Hindu and Jain as well. So it's going to be a two-part book, 2 volumes. Volume 1 will be published in a week or so. Volume 2 will take a few months. But I think it's important because the logic of war, it goes back to the Samson doctrine. It's you attack me, I attack you. We fight and attack, and whoever's the biggest and strongest and kills most wins. This is, to me, a very simplistic and primitive Neanderthal kind of logic. We're supposed to be Homo sapiens, or Homo sophiensis, as I call it. We should have a new logic, which is you attack me, okay, let's sit down and talk about compensation and why you did it and what's going on for you and why you thought that was a good idea, and can we heal together over this? And if you refuse and you keep attacking, okay, well then maybe some kind of defensive action is needed. So I've been researching Islamic logic, philosophy, and Islamic thinkers have been discussing this for over 1,000 years. When is it okay to do aggressive or defensive warfare? In what contexts? When is a true Muslim entitled to use force, if at all? And there's a whole lineage of thinkers, including mostly in Iran, actually, thinking about this. So I'm going into all that. And in the Christian world, of course, medieval philosophy got into logic in a big way and discussed the idea of a just war. When is it just to go to war? What does the enemy have to do to make it reasonable, rational to fight? I was sharing a coach ride back to France with an English young student who was saying, well, yeah, World War II, that was a just war. We had to fight that one. Not questioning, well, did we? Was it absolutely cut and dried? Wouldn't diplomacy have helped instead? Did we contribute to Hitler's aggression? What about the reparations that were demanded of Germany after World War I? What if different kinds of moves had been made? Could World War I have been averted, like Keynes wanted? No, none of that. It's all black and white. Just war. That's it. I'm not convinced. I think there's wiggle room in history to say wars could have always been averted, if only. And discuss. So the other thing I've been working on is obviously the 99 Names of Peace. And I want to just share a book that I found from my daughter's collection, The Key of It All, which is an encyclopedic guide to the sacred languages and magical systems of the world. Now, I didn't know this book existed till I found it in Sophia's book collection by a chap called David Allen Hulse, who is an amazing genius, and he gives the languages and their magical alphabets and their esoteric teachings in great detail, but he only focuses on the following. He focuses on cuneiform, which is the Akkadian Babylonian language system. He focuses on Hebrew, which is a sacred alphabet and language, which is very important in the Kabbalah. He looks at Arabic in detail, which is hugely important, Sufism, the Persian alphabet. He talks about Gurdjieff, who adapted that. Then he talks about Sanskrit, and which is ancient, obviously, Indo-European language in India. And then he talks about Tibetan, and he talks about how the Tibetan language became a very sophisticated vehicle for esoteric knowledge. And a friend of mine has been hosting a seminar in Glastonbury this week for a Tibetan Lama that friends of mine have been at. And that whole Lamaic teaching system comes out of that. He goes into it in depth. And then he goes into Chinese. Again, it has its own esoteric wisdom, Taoism, it has its own I Ching, it has its own trigrams. He explains all of this and the Taoist magical system. So, hey, that's quite an achievement from David Allen Hulse. However, what he didn't know, well, I didn't know he existed, he probably doesn't know I exist. So I did the same with my daughter, Sophia, only we did 99 languages. He's only done like 8. And Sophie and I did, as well as the ones he mentioned, we did Ainu, Albanian, Armenian, Assamese, Assyri, Balinese, Bulgarian, Cambodian, Catalan, Danish, Dogon from Africa, Dutch, Estonian, Ethiopic, Etruscan, Finnish, Georgian, German, Hausa from Nigeria, Hawaiian from Polynesian culture, Hungarian, etc., etc. So we did 99 languages in depth, and we looked at their words for peace, but also words for philosophy, wisdom. He's more interested in sort of esoteric, magical stuff. I'm fascinated by that, but the focus of the 99 Names of Peace is the names of peace. And I'm only interested in the magical stuff insofar as it can help with peace, which is why I wrote the first book on the peace magic.
That would be magic.
The handbook of peace magic, which is a branch of magic that I'm single-handedly developing here. Read my handbook. Because people are using magic for war in all those cultures and traditions, astrology and all kinds of things. They time their attacks. I mean, we know that world leaders, including Hitler, always used astrologers to say, when should we attack? Well, that's a misuse of magical knowledge. We should be using magic for peace, in my opinion. And that's what we've tried to do in the 99 Names of Peace. So that's what I've been up to this week. Any comments before we move on? Feedback?
No, well, talking a little bit about African wars and basically the artificial borders between African countries, naming our African countries. Who made those? Not the Africans.
I made that point in my talk to the Africans because we had questions and dialogue. I said, those are all imposed by colonial powers.
Exactly.
And the normal African culture had a way of dealing with conflict. The elders of a tribe, of a village, would solve the conflict, just as they did in the Celtic world. The druids, the shamans, would reason with all sides. In the global village, we don't have. That's why I've tried to work with gatherings of wisdom people, elders, but they're not listened to by the warrior caste.
Nope.
Tragically, but I did talk about that, and African indigenous wisdom is very interesting. Often contained in the myths, the legends, with the animals. Going back to the shamanic times, the animals talk in African legends.